It was so silly, but we had a very favorite pig. You know, we raised pigs. We had pigs, and that at least we did have pork. That was something that we did have to eat. But we had this favorite little pig who insisted on following us to church. And every Sunday when my mother was teaching Sunday school, this little pig would come and stay outside and wait for us. I've never heard tell about a little pig. But this little pig went to market, but I've never heard a little pig going to church or Sunday school. So it was delightful to me when we went back and did our hike, when we found the remains of this church. And as I think I told you, I have pieces of the stained glass window that's downstairs. And then one of the other things I can remember, too, was going with my mother and father fishing to the mouth of the lagoon where Fisherman's River ran into. And, you know, we go trout fishing in the evening. And that was always nice because we usually caught some trout, you see. And that's where my aunt lived. But my cousin Celia was reminding me the other day that they were on the part of the lagoon too, and they had to go over an old bridge. And one day, Uncle Will Gardner had a big dog, a black dog, and it knocked Celia into the river. And luckily, you know, there was somebody there, so she reminded me of this, and I remember the occasion. I wasn't actually there, but I certainly remember the story that she was knocked into the river by this dog. The little creeks along the corduroy roads would swell and overflow, and our dad would come and meet us, take us to school, carry us over these little creeks, and that's another delight too. Just, you know, here's a swollen creek, and you can't see the bridge, the little wee bridge over it, and your father's carrying you one kid at a time. That was lovely.
Did the school have a name, or was it just Cape Scott School?
Yes, Cape Scott School.
Mm-hmm. And who was a teacher at that time?
Okay, it would be Mr. Pullinger.
Pullinger.
Because my sister went to school when she was 5, just to make up the 9. Because there had to be 9 before we could have 9 students before we could have a school. You know, it was important for us to try to get a bit of education. Mm-hmm. And then after Mr. Pullinger went, we were lucky enough then to get a Miss Morris. However, I can't remember much about my early education because I don't think I'd received much. But there's something I can remember, Miss Morris asking me. Well, anyway, this teacher, Miss Morris, dear little Miss Morris, no teacher would dare ask such a thing as this, but this is what she asked me. What is a pole? And I said, a log. What is a Swede? I said, a turnip, because I was brought up on Swede turnips, you see. So that was the end of my education at Cape Scott. When we moved further away from the school and had to walk the 3 miles each way, we had to take our lunch naturally. The only thing that we had for sandwiches for a long, long time, which I couldn't look for in the face for years, was Rogers syrup sandwiches. If you've never tried it, don't. So we would arrive at school with these soggy syrup sandwiches. So we got very tired of those. And once in a while, we would have cranberry jam, because cranberries were very prolific up there in the bogs, and especially where we were building our cabin. So we were brought up on cranberries too. But so anyway, the Danish children who lived further away from school, their sandwiches mostly was lard and salt and pepper. So we begged our mother to make us lard sandwiches with salt and pepper, and it was a real pleasant change from the soggy sandwiches. It was the day that the mail arrived at Fisherman's Cove was a real red letter day for everybody. Usually I'd go straight from school because I had to. The road I turned down to get the mail was halfway home, so I used to go straight from school and get the mail. by myself because my sister had gone home with the Donaldson girls. And I was always wondering if a bear or a cougar would be crawling behind me, and I was forever turning and twisting my neck, but I would make it somehow, safely. We would get the paper. I guess we were getting a weekly paper, and in those days, the Uncle Wiggily stories were really something. But it was the greatest joy to me to go home and read these Uncle Wiggily stories, just such a delight to me. And I can remember the day that I went down and I read that the war was over. I didn't know too much what was going on, but it seemed that something very, very special had happened. So I remember rushing home as fast as I could to tell my mother that the war was over.
You arrived in 1913. How long did you...
6 years. We left in 1919. Mm-hmm.
Why did you leave?
Oh, yes, why did we leave? That's the story. In the meantime, for a few months we did come down to Vancouver, where my sister and I went to school, and that was most difficult for us because the education was so limited that we found it most difficult to fit in to going to a city school. In the meantime, Father wondered if we should stay in Vancouver, seeing we were there at that time for a little while. But Mother said no, she wanted to go back because we hoped that we would have our 80 acres, because in those days this was called a preemption, and if you cultivated 5, they would give you 80. So she decided that back we should go. Well, back we went. And we did start to build our log cabin, and it was made of upright logs which were hewn out of the forest. And my sister and I used to fill the clinks, or chinks you call them, with moss. And this was to be our home. And we had our little bits of furniture that we had been moved up to this cabin now. But in the meantime, things were about to change our life and our destiny because Mother became pregnant. And Father had to go out fishing because there's no way that there was no money, and we had to have money to come to Victoria, where now my 2 aunts were living. They had finally arrived in Victoria. So that's the reason why we left, but Mother waited a long time, and she was 8 months pregnant when we walked a trail.
You walked the trail?
We walked the trail to Shusharty Bay because she was frightened of that boat, of the little boat that would take us and could take us from Shusharty, from Fisherman's Cove to Shusharty Bay. And she said she'd rather walk. So this is what we did. We walked, and it took us... In my story that I had written, there was a little misprint there. It said 9 days it took us, but it was 3. Because it was 27 miles, and we did 9 miles a day, approximately.
Where did you stay along the way?
We stayed at Nawiti
mm-hmm.
And Cache Creek.
Nawiti and...
There were 2 little places that
mm-hmm.
we knew that we could, there were people who would put us up. But I was 9, maybe 9 and a half, and I knew that something special was happening to my mother, but I didn't know all the ins and outs and wherefores. But I knew she had to get to Victoria, as soon as possible. But that was an experience because following a blazed trail, and it was interesting because I must tell you about this little teacher though, this Miss Morris. But anyway, we'll go into that later, but she walked the trail with us. So it was my mother, myself, Miriam, and Miss Morris. Yes. And we 4 walked out. don't know what it was. It was something very, very special and very clean, and though we had so little, we had so much.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a rugged place. Oh, that's a lovely picture. Oh, isn't that lovely? Well, that's that.